Welcome back, and welcome to the Week 2 recap of college football action, Week 2 in the American Athletic Conference. Last week, all 14 teams were in action, and 10 of those teams picked up victories to start out season 1-0. This week, I want to start by giving a shout out to both of the service academies, Army and Navy. First, in Annapolis, Maryland, at Navy Marine Corps Stadium, in Annapolis, Maryland. The midshipmen took down conference rival Temple by a score of 38-11. Junior quarterback Blake Horvath rushed for 122 yards and 3 touchdowns while throwing for 112 yards and a touchdown on 5 for 9 passing. Defensively, Navy was stellar. The Temple Owls ran 10 first quarter plays and gained a total of only 5 yards, while the Navy defense scored the first points of the game when they knocked quarterback Forrest Brock out of the end zone for a safety after a fumbled shotgun snap. The defense then only gave up a field goal in the first half, taking a 23-3 lead into the locker room at halftime, and then giving up a touchdown and 2-point conversion in the fourth quarter to come up with a final score of 38-11. Navy goes to 2-0 for the first time since 2019, and they will have a week to rest before resuming their schedule in week 4. Temple, on the other hand, will have to regroup before coming back home to Philadelphia and taking on Coastal Carolina in a non-conference tilt. The Owls fall to 0-2 on the season with the loss to Navy. Down in Sarasota, Florida, the Army Cadets lined up against Florida Atlantic and won the war on the ground, controlling the ball for nearly 39 minutes in an impressive 24-7 road win over FAU. The Black Knights, who began playing football in 1890, are in a conference for only the second time ever in their history. They were a member of Conference USA from 1998 to 2004, and then they joined the AAC last year as a football-only member. In the game, Army's Kanye Udo capped an 82-yard touchdown drive with an 8-yard touchdown run in the team's first possession to go up 7-0. On their next possession, Bryson Daly found Casey Reynolds wide open behind the defense for a 44-yard score. The Owls managed to put a touchdown up near the end of the first half, capitalizing on a fumble. Army opened the second half scoring with a field goal. Max DiDomenico came up with an interception deep in Army territory. The team then marched 96 yards in 10.5 minutes to score the TD that iced the game. That last touchdown came on a fake field goal attempt with holder Matthew Rhodes scoring on a run to the left. This came right after what would have been Daly's second touchdown pass of the game, but was dropped in the end zone on a 3rd and 12 play. DiDomenico came up with another big play on defense as he stopped FAU quarterback Cam Fancher on a 4th and goal at the 1 with 8:44 left in the game. Army took over at their own 1, and the Owls never saw the ball again. The Black Knights finished with 405 yards on the ground, 117 by the quarterback Daly. Fancher for FAU threw for 193 yards, but the FAU ground game was held to just 42 yards. Army will have a week to celebrate its 2-0 start to the season with a bye week, while Florida Atlantic will next take on Florida International, still seeking their first win of the season. One of the teams I'd pegged to lead the conference this year, the Memphis Tigers, did not disappoint against Troy. Although they lost one of the most dynamic playmakers, running back Sutton Smith, to a knee injury in week 1, the Tigers' Mario Anderson picked up the slack and ran for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. Quarterback Seth Hennigan went 20 of 32 for 161 yards and a touchdown, moving him into second place for career TD passes at Memphis. Meanwhile, running back Brandon Thomas added 2 short touchdown runs to move into 5th place on Memphis's all-time touchdown list with 28. Memphis broke a 7-7 tie with 2 scores to go up 21-7 at halftime. Then crossed to the to the final result. Then they cruised to the final result with a 38-17 victory. Please excuse the blip there. With the big win, Memphis goes to 2-0 as they prepare for next week's big matchup at Florida State. In New Orleans, Tulane took a 20-10 lead into halftime against Kansas State, but then the Wildcats outscored the Green Wave 24-7 in the second half, and Tulane fell at home by a score of 34-27. Tulane outgained Kansas State 491-396 and led in time of possession by nearly 7 minutes. Quarterback Darian Mensah had another big day, going 19 of 29 for 342 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he did throw 1 interception. Also, he had a critical fumble. With the score tied at 27 in the fourth quarter and Tulane on the move to potentially retake the lead, Mensah was hit and fumbled at the K-State 25, and Jack Fabus of the Wildcats returned it 60 yards for the game-winning touchdown. Tulane had one last chance to either tie it or send it into overtime or win it outright, and they had a first and goal from the K-State 12 with 17 seconds left, but an offensive pass interference penalty backed them up. Then Mensah threw an incomplete, and then the end zone interception snuffed out the comeback effort. Tulane, now 1-1 on the season, will now face a tough test as they travel to Oklahoma to take on the Sooners. Perhaps one of my biggest questions this early in the season is whether or not UTSA should still be considered a conference favorite. They weren't all that dominant in week 1 against Kennesaw State, and they got run out of the building this past week against Texas State, losing 49-10. It could be that Texas State is just a really, really good team this year, and that was certainly on display in week 2. It was the first time in 6 attempts that Texas State had beaten UTSA. The two UTSA quarterbacks, Owen McCown and Eddie Lee Marburger, combined for 252 yards through the air, but Texas State dominated the contest, posting 504 total yards, 309 passing, and 195 rushing in the big win. There's no doubt that Texas State will be moving up in many polls this week. Meanwhile, the Roadrunners, who fall to 1-1, must now face one of the best teams in the nation, the Texas Longhorns. One of the other teams I thought would finish strong this year in the AAC is South Florida, but I did not expect them to win this past week at Alabama, and they did not. The final score was 42-16. South Florida actually scored first on a 34-yard John Cannon field goal. Alabama scored twice and took a 14-6 halftime lead. Then Ron Keith then opened the second half scoring with a 2-yard run for the Bulls, cutting the lead to 14-13. With another field goal, USF was within 5 at 21-16 with 6:47 left. But then Alabama put up 3 touchdowns for the final margin of victory. Quarterback Byron Brown completed 15 of 35 passing attempts for 103 yards, but he did not have his best game. Alabama's performance was sloppy, and they had 2 turnovers. There was one point in the game where USF, down 21-13, made it to a 4th and goal, but opted for the field goal rather than going for a touchdown. But the Bulls, who were a 30.5-point underdog coming in, fought valiantly until the wheels finally came off in the fourth quarter. USF, now 1-1, will now travel to take on Southern Mississippi. East Carolina went to 2-0 with a 20-14 win over Old Dominion. Rajay Harris ran for 132 yards and scored 2 touchdowns on 26 carries, and Andrew Conrad added 2 field goals to lead the Pirates. ECU's defense managed to stand tall to overcome 4 interceptions by the offense. ODU got the ball back with a minute 53 left at their own 9, and they were driving. They had an 11-play drive going and got to the ECU 35 when time ran out. It was a big win for the Pirates, who will next entertain in-state rival Appalachian State. UAB traveled to Louisiana Monroe, and not a lot of good things happened. The Blazers got beat 32-6 and now take their 1-1 record on the road to face Arkansas. Speaking of Arkansas, Arkansas State was the host in their game against Tulsa. Tulsa scored the first 3 points and carried a 17-7 lead into the locker room at halftime. But Arkansas State outscored the Golden Hurricane 21-7 in the second half, including the go-ahead touchdown, which came with just 3:30 left. Tulsa, now at 1-1, will next travel to in-state rival Oklahoma State. Charlotte was overmatched in its contest against the University of North Carolina. Quarterback Deshaun Purdy threw 2 touchdown passes, but the hosting Tar Heels controlled the ball for nearly 34 minutes and picked up 269 yards on the ground versus just 49 by Charlotte. The final score was North Carolina 38, Charlotte 20. The 49ers have now opened the season with 2 losses in a row and look to finally break into the win column next week against Gardner-Webb. In Denton, Texas, quarterback Chandler Morris is having a special season for the Mean Green of North Texas. Morris threw for 332 yards and 4 touchdowns, fighting off 3 interceptions in the process, and led his team to a 35-20 victory over Stephen F. Austin. The Mean Green controlled the ball for over 33 minutes and rolled up 504 total yards. UNT will now take its 2-0 record and put it on the line this week at home versus Texas Tech. Finally, I want to give full props to the Rice Owls. After a tough loss to Sam Houston in week one, they came back strong in week two, posting a 69-7 blowout win against Texas Southern. Dean Connors ran for 3 touchdowns, Tajee Atkins ran for 2 more, and quarterback EJ no Nainer, EJ Nainer threw for, EJ Nainer threw for 189 and 2 touchdowns. On defense, On defense, the Owls registered 4 sacks and gathered in 2 interceptions. They did have 8 penalties for 72 yards, and that will certainly need to be cleaned up as they stay at home in Houston and put their 1-1 record up against crosstown rival, the University of Houston. In week one, I correctly predicted 13 of the 14 games. In week two, I was 11-1, with my only loss coming in the UTSA versus Texas State matchup. This week, both Army and Navy will be in their bye weeks. UTSA entertains the University of Texas, one of the top teams in the country, and the Roadrunners will lose. Tulane goes on the road to Oklahoma, where the Green Wave will also lose. Memphis at 2-0 will entertain a very good Florida State team that has gotten off to a very rocky start. But I believe Florida State will pick up the win versus Memphis. USF will hope to bounce back from their tough loss to Alabama by taking a win against Southern Mississippi, and that is exactly what they will do. ECU will host Appalachian State, and unfortunately for the homestanding Pirates, I see the visiting Mountaineers taking the win in this one. FAU will pick up its first win of the year against Florida International. North Texas will fall at home against Texas Tech. UAB will be traveling to Arkansas, and the Blazers will come up short in Fayetteville. Rice will be in their home city, but they will be the road team against the crosstown rival Houston Cougars, and Rice will lose the game. Charlotte will finally pick up its first win of the season at home against Gardner-Webb. Tulsa will travel to Oklahoma State, where the Golden Hurricanes will lose. And last but not least, Temple will host Coastal Carolina, but will come out of week 3 still winless. It will be a tough week for the AAC, with only South Florida, Florida Atlantic, and Charlotte picking up wins. Well, that's it for this week. Drop me a message in the chat. Make sure you subscribe and tune in next week to see how your favorite team does right here in the American Athletic Conference.